Hello, welcome to a great conversation we have today. I get the chance to sit down with Amélie Breitburd, who's the CEO of Lloyd's for Europe, and I'm Brian Falchuk. I'm the managing partner of Insurance Evolution Partners and the author of the book series, The Future of Insurance: From Disruption to Evolution. Those two things, disruption, evolution, the future of insurance, all front and center. Lloyd's is this place where so much change and so much of this sort of incubation of the future of our industry comes from. So Amélie, I'm very excited to sit down with you and talk about, in particular, the European context. So thank you for making some time today.
Thanks, and good afternoon.
I do want to start off quite thematically. A lot of people, certainly aware of climate change, natural catastrophe. It was so front and center for literally tens of millions of people, especially right before we did this discussion with the heat wave that struck Europe. It's been flooding before that. It's been lots of other natural catastrophes, much more front and center, and yet, from the European context, we only see about a quarter of the population or a quarter of the economy protected through insurance against NatCat. Why do you think that is, even though it's so front and center for us today?
Well, the thing is, as you're probably aware of, there's a lot of various national schemes a bit everywhere in Europe. So there's probably always this expectation that governments will prevail at some point and will solve it. So I think that's part of the problem. The thing is, first, it depends on the country. So you have those countries where you have NatCat every year, and you have those countries where it's a bit new. And even when you look at those national schemes, they are very different from one country to the other. And there are some countries where you would have a significant coverage. That would be France. But even with those fires this year, you can see that it's not going to be the case for everything. And there are some other countries where, if you think about the floods last year, for example, in the Netherlands or in Belgium, that was unexpected. And to be honest, if you look at even in the Netherlands, they have a national scheme, but that's what it's going to be for what I call the big one. So probably 10, 20 or 30 years time when actually the sea is going to flood the Netherlands, because I think it's not a matter of if, but when. And that's what the national scheme covers, what we call the horizontal floods. But actually, when it comes to the vertical ones, the ones created by rain and then overflowing the rivers, so actually those floods were not covered. But the thing is, the wording was just saying, floods are excluded. And that was it, because they were thinking that the national scheme would kick in. So I think that's part of the misunderstanding that, well, governments will prevail. And even after COVID, that's what happened. So if you think about all those risks, what we would tend to call now systemic risk, because COVID was a systemic risk, climate change is going to be one, and cyber is certainly the next one, then everybody believes that governments will prevail. I think indeed you are talking about climate change. I think the awareness has increased significantly. It's almost expansion. So everybody's now aware of that, but still it still comes as a surprise. And I think it's how to make sure that, unfortunately, it's embedded in everybody's life and that they need to think about it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You're talking about sort of the risk transfer question, that governments would step in, and that's who I've transferred my risk to, sort of unknowingly, because there's, that sort of social backstop. But there's other pieces to the insurance puzzle. There's risk solutions, risk mitigation. How do you see those sort of more service and containment or lowering of the risk stepping in these situations?
So for sure, there's risk awareness. That's the first bit. I think that then, you were talking about risk solutions. As you say, it's about transferring risk, but also one of the big benefits of insurance as opposed to government schemes is that you deal with prevention. Yeah. Because there's an incentive for each and everybody. It could be individuals, it could be companies, to then build prevention and improve and reduce your risk. This is, I think, that the big one of the big advantages of insurance, that people need to think about this, and either they think about it before, or some of those very good products that are very successful are those who would have clauses that we would call, building back better. Mm-hmm. And then you help your customers building back better, and then they'll be prepared for the next one. And hopefully it's going to be fine. And it also reduces their their premium, which is, I think, a win-win situation. So those products are very good at doing that. And as you were saying, it's also about transferring risk and sharing risk. And I think that's part of what we need to see, that insurance is also fostering mutualization between various populations. And if you think about Europe, for example, it's very different. So you could be exposed to fires, to floods, to wind, to drought. So it's very different from one place to the other, but everyone has somehow its own NatCat.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. And the markets are so different. And Lloyd's is in really a unique position to see across all that. So that must give you a sense of the sort of vision for insurance in the European continent. Where do you see things going? How do you see this developing over time?
So if you compare to the US, for example, there's a significantly lower penetration in insurance. So all risks together, not only NatCat, but that's 3% penetration in the US as opposed to 2% in Europe. And that percentage is, the total premium related to GDP, which is kind of significant because those would be like 20 trillions, for example, in the US, or 15 trillion in Europe. So there's a significant difference. And this is where, so Lloyd's, more than half of the premium comes from the US. So we have quite a good experience. And as you know, there's all sorts of NatCat in the US. And but then, and it's not only that people count less on governments in the US, because actually you have those schemes as well. If you think about for example, there's one as well. But probably the idea of sharing risk is more embedded in everybody's life, and they're more used to those very significant natural catastrophe. So, so indeed, we believe that Lloyd's is very well positioned for Europe. And what we'd like to do is certainly participate with, it could be policymakers, regulators, but also all the risk managers in raising this awareness in Europe.
You mentioned a couple of constituents just then: regulators, risk managers. Who needs to come together? Who needs to take action to really move this vision forward?
So I think it's everybody, because I think that because now it's a bit like climate change. People now have this awareness. So we've reached this tipping point where it's absolutely the right moment to do so. There's going to be a new commission, in 2024. Sounds far away, but it's tomorrow. And when you know the pace and the time that it takes to take the right decision. So we need to have everybody around the table. And Lloyd's, it's not, it happens that in Europe we're an insurance company, but it's a corporation and it's a marketplace. Yeah. And it's about getting capital from everywhere in the world to cover all the risk in the world. And so we are conveners, and we can help definitely having everybody around the table. So it would start with risk managers, because those are the ones facing the risk, and that's the demand. And you need to have suppliers, so insurance companies. You need to have policymakers, because they are the ones, writing the law. And then you need to have governments as well, because they are the ones deciding to step in or not.
Yeah. Well, you definitely paint a picture of, first of all, an understanding amongst populations, businesses, and individuals that there is a risk here and they need to engage in it and not just, stand back and let someone come in after the fact. And that's not just a financial question. It's about how they engage in the solutions around it and their participation and maybe changing their risk. But you're absolutely right. It's not for any one party. It's something we all have to come together, in that sort of marketplace mentality. There's multiple parties that need to work together to change that and to bring about that vision. Amélie, thank you so much for the thoughts today and helping to push forward. It is something I think on so many more minds on the back of the recent experiences, not just COVID, now wildfires and drought and, as you say, wind events and flooding events. It's multifaceted, but something we all need to participate in. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot. Have a great day.